It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us from London, Nico Hines, world editor at The Daily Beast. Happy New Year to you, sir.
Happy New Year. Good evening.
From Jerusalem, France 24 senior correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent. How's your Friday?
It's been busy, Francois, as you might expect in this part of the world.
Independent journalist Tanya Rachmanova is with us. Your latest documentary about China's secret prison camps is available on demand on the platform of Franco-German channel Arte. Yeah. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And we say hello to Eric Randolph, culture editor at the French news agency AFP. What has the culture editor of the French news agency AFP been doing this week?
I've been having fun, I think is the right word, at Fashion Week this week, and mixing it up with trying to do some more serious work at the same time, now and again.
All right, more serious work. We're going to be on to more serious things in a moment. You can listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. Did the map of the Middle East suddenly just get bigger? On Tuesday, Iran hit points in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Syria, and then all the way over on its eastern border, separatist militants in Balochistan province. It was payback for recent attacks targeting police in its own Sistan and Baluchestan province. Hitting nuclear-armed Pakistan, though, that's a different order. It comes as the neighbouring countries were carrying out joint naval exercises together. In fact, Pakistan's caretaker prime minister had posed for the cameras in Davos with Iran's foreign minister. So this caught, well, everybody by surprise. Nico Hines, what was your reaction?
Well, what's got into the water in Tehran was the first thought. I mean, it's kind of bizarre the way, we've had this conflagration, these hellish missile exchanges and deaths and awful goings on in the Middle East for so many months now. And for all of this time, we've been talking about Iranian proxies and what the various, Hamas and the Houthis and Hezbollah are going to do and what Iran wants them to do. And we've been trying to second guess what Tehran is thinking and will there be any escalation? And yet there was nothing directly from them. And then suddenly, all at once, they were firing missiles literally in all directions. And I think it's taken everybody by surprise somewhat. And I think almost inevitably with all of these things, there's probably domestic considerations to consider here. And the fact is that Tehran obviously felt that they had to show that the public back home that they did mean business and that they do deserve to be at the top table when these huge global discussions are taking place.
Let's talk about those domestic concerns. Eric Randolph, there was that huge bomb blast at the start of the year at a ceremony for honoring the late Revolutionary Guards leader Qasem Soleimani. Was that what this is about? But still, hitting Pakistan.
Yeah, it's a little bit to do with that. But the thing with Iran, I think, gets underestimated is that we're so used to talking about Iran as a threat. It's always discussed as a threat by Western governments, by Israel, and there's good reason for that. But it's also a country that feels incredibly under threat itself. It feels very vulnerable in that region. It's seen the US invade neighbouring countries. It's seen its closest ally, Syria, almost collapse over the last decade. It's surrounded by what it considers enemy bases. It faces a very serious terrorist threat, as we saw 2 weeks ago when dozens of people were killed in an attack on a commemoration. And so a lot of what Iran does in the region is not irrational. It's about trying to, in some way, show that it's not going to take these attacks lying down, but without retaliating to such an extent that it provokes further attacks.
Which surprised you more, the attack on Pakistan or the fact that you saw Iraq recall its ambassador to Iran? That's an unusual step after the strike on Erbil.
I think a lot of this is protocol. It's about saving face. It's about reacting in public in a way that shows that you're not taking these things lying down and that you're taking them seriously, but also not going so far as to allow it to escalate any further. I think ever since the start of the fighting in in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. We've seen Iran and other actors in the region want to show that they're taking this seriously, want to show that they're involved, want to show that they're important in some way, but without doing it at a level that actually triggers a regional war, which actually none of them want.
Yeah, everybody calibrating their response after a Wednesday recall of its ambassador. Pakistan responding in kind on Thursday, claiming to hit Baloch insurgents hiding out across the border.
Pakistan reserves the right to respond to this illegal act, and the responsibility for the consequences will lie squarely with Iran. We have conveyed this message to the government of Iran.
Tanya Rakhmanova, the Pakistanis and the Iranians, this Friday they said they're speaking. Is this where it ends? Is it over now?
Well, I don't. Well, sorry to say, I don't think that it has been ever that serious. I think the problem is Iran, that they are not doing anything about what's happening in Gaza, and they should have done, but they won't do it because they don't want to get into direct conflict, neither with Israel or with the United States. So they have to do something spectacular, but not that dangerous, as you say. And I think that everyone in the region understands it.
Everyone in the region understands it. Catherine Norris-Trent, a lot's been made of the fact we've been focusing a lot on Pakistan because it's so unprecedented, but a lot has been made of the fact that those missiles they used to hit positions in Syria, to hit Erbil in the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan, were long-range missiles, and that's seen as a message sent to Washington and to Israel.
Absolutely, and that's how people have been reading it here. I mean, any move from Iran is, of course, closely scrutinized here, and there's a lot of fear about what Iran could do next, although people are really hoping that since this hasn't evolved yet into a wider regional conflict, that the feeling is that people have also, I've been speaking to, saying that they don't believe that there's a desire at the moment as things stand for this to widen. So people are on edge, of course, watching very closely what happens. They definitely felt more vulnerable with that use of long-range missiles and, you know, a range of countries being attacked. So, nervousness here. Of course, a deep distrust of Iran amongst many Israelis in political and civilian life. And basically, people here hoping that this isn't going to get even worse than it already is.
Nico Heinz, the Daily Beast reporting on how this is possibly dragging China into the equation because China has good relations with both Pakistan and Iran.
That's right. Yeah, China does seem to be the kind of favoured go-between. It's someone they get on well with both the Pakistanis and the Iranians, and there's lots of investment tied up in that, of course, as well. A lot of the Pakistani hopes for improving their economy rest on Chinese infrastructure projects to kind of try and improve their port and their export businesses. And so I think China is well placed to step in here. But I think, as we've all touched on, it seems pretty obvious that neither side wants this to explode into an all-out kind of war between the two nations. I think both governments are happy having fired their one set of missiles and now will happily play along and talk to China and no doubt make some statements saying what a good job China did to help ease things, and there can be a nice handshake and everybody can move on.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see just how much there have been ripple effects since October the 7th and Hamas's surprise attack on Israel. We've talked about what's in past editions, about what's going on at Israel's northern border with Lebanon. We're now seeing in Iraq, as we just mentioned, and as if the existing regional tensions weren't enough, Friday's rallies in Yemen's capital, as massive as ever. After a week of U.S.-led strikes on Houthi positions, retaliation for the Iran-aligned movement's targeting since mid-December of commercial shipping, the attacks targeting the passageway for 12% of the world's maritime trade. They're seriously disrupting global supply chains. The little dot you see in red is the one of the last ones there, recorded on January the 15th. And there is this feeling, Catherine Norris-Trent, of this. It starts January on October 7th, and then this ripple effect. We don't know where it ends.
Mm-hmm. Right, how far is this ripple effect going to go? That's the question. In terms of Red Sea traffic, of course, nervousness in Israel, been, drones flying over near Eilat in the south. It's already having an impact on prices here and on imports, on the goods that Israel imports via the Red Sea. So I was speaking to people about the cost of cars and car parts going up. That's going to surely increase as this trade is hit even harder. Any Israeli vessels, of course, as well as British and American ones, would be a prime target. So that's just another front which people are concerned about here, amongst the other fronts you've touched on. And of course, in the north, there's a situation there on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. A lot of people I've been speaking to in the Israeli armed forces really looking to concentrate on that front, hoping that won't spill over. It's been simmering along, for a while now. We've learned from various officials, interviews that officials have given in the past few days, that members of the war cabinet managed to talk Netanyahu down in the early days after the October 7th attacks of actually launching an attack there. So there's a real sense of volatility on several fronts. And of course, then you've got the explosive situation in the West Bank, which has, seen numerous and intensifying raids on refugee camps and armed groups there. So there's a real sense of simmering pretty much all around from this standpoint here.
Eric Randolph, who's more sort of overstretched? You mentioned earlier Iran doesn't want to be in a direct confrontation with the United States. Who's more sort of overstretched right now? Is it Iran or is it the U.S., again, dealing with the Houthis on top of keeping an eye on what's going on in Lebanon and in Israel?
I think the problem the US has is it's such a low-cost operation for the Houthis to disrupt shipping and have an enormous outsized impact on the world economy. And I think it'll be interesting, again, to see how China responds to that, because I think China's already come out and tried to put some pressure on the Houthis to stop. And China does have that ability to put pressure on Iran. And it'll be interesting to see whether that then trickles down to the Houthis, because China obviously has a huge stake in shipping through that strait. But I don't think Iran has ever really wanted a huge conflagration in the region any more than the US or Israel. I think actually, if you want to take something positive from all this, is that we've been talking about the risk of spillover and escalation since October the 7th. And so far, every actor in the region has done everything they can to show that they are tough and they mean business, but without taking it to the next step. I think if it would be a terrible accident if it goes further than this.
Tanya Rachmanova?
Well, I agree. No, because what next step means? I mean, that's Iran is where it is. I mean, for example, speaking about China, I think they will do, but as much as they want, and mainly for their commerce and their economy. They will speak up, probably not much, and they won't get involved that much, unless their direct interests are concerned. And so it's probably Houthi, not. I don't see anything else. And but I don't think where you can go. I mean, Iran stands where it stands. It has to show that it's strong and it answers the things. But then where should it go?
Where does it go from there?
Yeah, where it's
and what happens,
is possible.
And what happens the day after the fighting in Gaza? That's something we've been talking about really since the month of October. The plan is straightforward. Gulf states rebuild Gaza, and Israel signs on to Saudi Arabia's decades-old roadmap for lasting peace with the Palestinians. That's being talked about more and more. The Americans are on board. One party, though, still needs convincing.
The State of Israel must have security control over the entire territory west of the Jordan River. That's a necessary condition. I've told our American friends this, and I also stopped the attempts to impose a reality on us that would harm Israel's security.
president putting out a formal reaction on Thursday. Quote, "This is not a new comment by Prime Minister Netanyahu. We obviously see it differently. We believe the Palestinians have every right to live in an independent state with peace and security." Catherine Norris-Trent, Benjamin Netanyahu, Joe Biden, they had not spoken for more than 3 weeks in the last hours, the White House saying the two have picked up the telephone.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to get the readout of that, because I'm sure it'll be wrapped up in diplomatic language, but they're just not on the same page here. And that very public comment by Netanyahu saying, look, you have to say no even to our best friends, and this message to the Americans, it just spells out how, opposed the path forward they see going from here is. It's been interesting because I've been asked a lot today in the news bulletins about reactions in Israel to what Netanyahu said. And frankly, there wasn't that much, because everyone knows that's what Netanyahu thinks. It's just that he's spelled it out in this very blatant way. He sees, I think, pursuing this war and this, agreeing to a ceasefire for him would probably end his premiership, and then he's got all these legal worries as well. So his political survival really is hanging on this. It's going to be very difficult to convince him to sign up to this peace deal, to back down. It's something that's kind of, he's drawn it in a red line here. So I don't know what kind of tactics the Americans are going to use. Netanyahu is probably thinking also that he can maybe bypass the Biden administration. During the Obama administration, he went directly to Congress and appealed to lawmakers in the U.S. to keep up U.S. support for Israel. He's probably banking on that, and he's probably hoping to be able to wait it out until he hopes Trump gets into the White House as well.
He's waiting all the way to November. Nico Hines, what should the Biden administration do?
Well, I think that they're getting increasingly frustrated. You could tell from, if you listen to the actual spokesman at the State Department reacting to Netanyahu's press statement, it was clear that there was a kind of irritation building here. You've got to remember that Antony Blinken has spent the last week travelling around the Middle East, going to meet all these different governments, coming up with this plan about what are we going to do the day after, kind of getting an agreement from the Arab states that, okay, we can kind of push for some sort of, at least, look, no one's saying there's going to be an immediate agreement towards a two-state solution, obviously. But if we can at least come up with a pathway to a two-state solution, then that gives us some sort of framework that we can build a ceasefire around. There's been hours and hours of negotiation, of flying, of trying to build up this plan, of trying to bring together different people with so many opposing. I mean, look at all the tensions that are bubbling up everywhere. Trying to get some sort of idea that can be that can have buy-in from the different capitals across the region, whether they're from the Shia end or the Sunni end. And he's done all that work, and then Netanyahu has just absolutely spat on the floor in the face of all of those efforts. And I think that the US is finally losing its rag with Israel, and it will be very interesting to see if, I would love to have actually listened to the real call between Biden and Netanyahu, because Biden is the most pro-Israeli American politician that we've had for generations. But even he, I think, is starting to lose his temper. And of course, ultimately, the whole Israeli project does depend on America. America does have a huge amount of power here. And if it decides to exert that power and to say enough is enough, then things actually can change.
Not everyone in Israel rejecting out of hand the Saudi plan. Present in Davos at the World Economic Forum this week, the country's president. His post is largely ceremonial. Yitzhak Herzog is not from Benjamin Netanyahu's party. Still, he calls the plan a potential game changer.
The regional context is an axis for development and progress. It's an axis for a better horizon for all parties concerned. And clearly, the Saudi option as part of it, as the whole normalization process, is a key to the ability to exit from the war into a new horizon.
An axis of development and it's interesting because we have an axis of resistance, is what Iran calls here. And there you have Yitzhak Herzog talking about a different axis, and this one with Saudi Arabia at the heart of it.
Everyone loves a good axis. The Saudi Arabia thing is potentially the only leverage that could change it. But I have to say, whatever you think of this, whatever you think of what's happening between Israel and Hamas at the moment, the idea that Netanyahu could suddenly reverse decades of opposition, effective opposition to a two-state solution at this moment seems absurd to me, because it would literally be rewarding Hamas with a two-state solution promise off the back of their attack on October the 7th. And I don't see how Netanyahu has any room of maneuver within his party or with his right-wing allies to make that promise. Ironically, the only way he can do it is if he doesn't mean it. The only way that this deal could possibly come about is if he makes it clear to the Israeli people and people that support him, at least, that he has no real intention of seeing the deal through, that he could kick the can down the road for so long that the Palestinian state would never actually come about. That seems to be his only option here, which just means it's somewhat doomed from the start. But the only carrot that he has is Saudi Arabian normalization.
But why did Itzhak Herzog say what we just heard there?
The flip side of that is the golden egg they're really trying to reach for here is recognition from Saudi Arabia. Normalization with Saudi Arabia would make this whole thing worthwhile. But are Saudi Arabia really going to believe that Israel are genuinely seeking a Palestinian state with Netanyahu, or is it all just going to be words? Are we just going to be talking about this the way we talk about the Oslo Agreement in 30 years' time, where it was a deal that meant ultimately nothing? Everybody shook hands, won some Nobel Peace Prizes, and nothing changed? That just seems...
Tanya Rachmanova?
Well, first of all, Saudi Arabia, I mean, if somebody won in the whole story, it's Iran, because there's a peace deal with Saudi Arabia. If it's not that, it postponed for years and years.
But you see, for instance, the Saudis have been very stepping back when it comes to Yemen, even though they were the ones who led the coalition against the Houthis. Now they're being quiet. So, again, is that to give themselves room to make this deal?
Well, they try to negotiate the deal, but the deal for Palestinians, by the way, Netanyahu doesn't want a two-state solution, Hamas neither. You have to negotiate with somebody else. Hamas, they have another program, so I don't think that they would accept a two-state solution. Saudi Arabia is trying to negotiate a deal, and that would be a great thing, but not for Netanyahu, neither for Hamas. But then what is the solution? Because I don't know, you better learn the history lessons like the Russians did it in Chechnya.
Catherine Norris-Trent, you just heard Eric Randolph bury the Saudi plan. Is that the consensus where you are?
Yeah, it's difficult. I agree. It's really difficult to see Netanyahu backing down. He spent decades and decades opposed to a two-state solution. So now, at this particular time, to do it. And even the carrot of normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia, I mean, it seems it's hard to imagine that. I can't envisage it. That would be a big deal for Israel. Of course, just 2 weeks before the October 7th attacks, Netanyahu himself was speaking out, saying it would start a new era and change the Middle East. Welcome to a new Middle East. Well, things have dramatically changed since then. So it seems, it's very difficult to see a path forwards at the moment towards any kind of ceasefire. Another thing to note here in Israel, though, is that the splits are really emerging in the coalition of this so-called unity government, which was formed following October the 7th. So you've had a minister there in the war cabinet saying, look, at the moment the leadership is not being honest with the people. We've got to have a ceasefire. We've got to get the hostages released. I don't know how long Netanyahu can hold this coalition together, but he's really, really going to alienate some of his really far-right partners in the coalition if he would agree to this ceasefire deal. So I don't see how that can hold together at all. And he rejected it out of hand in his conference on Thursday, as we heard.
Yeah, but first of all, I mean, Netanyahu is not a dictator. So, probably something will change, because I don't see what else you could do, because with the, as I
It'll
say,
have to come from Israeli domestic politics.
yes, absolutely. But they have to find a solution for Israel, because otherwise this war can go forever. I mean, for years, I don't know, for years, for weeks, whatever. And there will be a lot of losses from both sides. And what is the victory? I mean, you can't get rid of terrorists. They can call themselves Hamas or in Islamic movement or whatever. Well, I see it in Chechnya. You can't kill them by killing them.
Can't kill the idea.
Yeah, so I don't know.
We're going to turn our attention to what has long predicted as the country that would become the world's biggest superpower at some time in the future. But China's troubles may only be starting. For the second year running, the population declining. 2 million fewer people. That's double the drop of 2022. Despite the lifting back in 2016 of the country's one-child policy, the birth rate seems stuck, fueling that favorite question. I'll put it to you, Tanya Rachmanova. Will China grow old before it grows rich?
Probably, because at least in the sort of coming future. Because first of all, being a woman, I can tell you, you can't order me to have one child for, it forced me to have one child for years, and then all of a sudden, now I have to have many children. It can't go that quickly. And then don't forget the COVID. I mean, COVID, we were suffering here, but in China, it lasted much longer, it was much more difficult, and the people were suffering a lot. And so to ask them now to start the life again, to have many children, when women are not protected by law, because it's still the husband who has everything, divorce is very complicated, etc. You can't have this. And the economy, well, it can grow, but to a certain point. I mean, it can't grow endlessly. But that's what is interesting, that this year we'll have 75 years of the Chinese Republic. So Xi Jinping has to do something spectacular. I don't know what, but he has to. He will do something.
Yeah, for many in China, coming out of COVID, as Tanya was saying, with a housing bubble that's burst, this whole having a family thing seems like a lot of pressure.
Nowadays, childhood is completely filled by study, and kids get burnt out easily. Many children don't ever experience the joy of childhood. For the parents, they think that their children are under a lot of pressure, but the pressure parents experience is even greater. So people are anxious about having children. So speaking from the whole orientation of today's society, I think kids should have a happier childhood, and this also make the parents happy as well.
So, Nico Heinz, how does Xi Jinping decree a happier childhood for Chinese kids?
It's very difficult, because I think if you look at these demographic trends, one of the biggest and most obvious correlations is that the wealthier a country becomes, the lower the birth rate is. So even if China does achieve the dream which they have been sort of building towards for the last 30, 40 years, which is that they're going to be the richest, most powerful nation on earth, which arguably is still possible, but by the sort of like 2030s or something, that they're going to have a hugely powerful military, they're going to be at the absolute apex of their political power and their economic power. And that's why people are worried about Taiwan, for example, because as we see the ticking time bomb of China's inevitable collapse kind of coming decades down the line, we realise that the window for action for Xi to achieve something spectacular, like Tanya was just saying, is kind of coming up right now. But if you look in the long term, if China does become as wealthy as it wants to become, then once again, as soon as you get all these middle class people, and as soon as you get more aspirations and better careers and better prospects, people moving to a city and starting a life there, then what inevitably happens is that the birth rate comes down. And so it's going to be impossible for them to turn that around.
Okay, it's been a mixed week for China, by the way, on the world stage. You just mentioned Taiwan. Which shrugged off warnings from the mainland and re-elected the sovereignist DPP to an unprecedented third-term president and parliament. They'll have to have a coalition. The Chinese did manage to sway the Pacific island of Nauru to drop recognition of Taipei for Beijing. And after the Maldives president returned from China, the island nation told India to recall the 77 soldiers it's got posted there, part of a falling out that includes accusations that Delhi's trying to steal the Maldives tourists by posting pictures of Prime Minister Modi at the beach at India's nearby tropical Lakshadweep Islands. So we could look at tropical places and say it's been a good week for China. We can look at those demographics and say not so much, Eric Randolph.
Yeah, I thought one of the interesting things we wrote about AFP this week was there's a lot of worry about disinformation and how AI is going to fuel disinformation in all of these dozens of elections that are coming up this year. We've got major elections all around the world. And actually, interestingly, Taiwan was a first test of that. And there was a lot of disinformation spreading on social media that a lot of experts believe was being directed by Beijing against the Taiwanese, the front runner who then won the election. And Taiwan seems to have been able somehow to insulate itself from all of that disinformation.
They said there was a lot of bad disinformation. That's what one Taiwanese panelist told us in this studio a few.
Yeah, but a lot of disinformation does seem very bad to us, and we can't believe that anybody falls for any of it. I mean, most conspiracy theories, to me, seem completely insane. So, but apparently, sometimes they seem to work. But hopefully, that's a positive sign, not just for Taiwan, but for the rest of the world, that we might be able to escape some of the more terrible sides of all of that.
By the way, declining birth rates aren't just for the Far East. It's a perennial talking point in Germany, in Italy, and now here in France, where the president this week announced a scheme for shorter but much better paid parental leave.
Male and female infertility has progressed a lot in recent years and is causing a lot of couples to suffer. A major plan to combat this scourge will be launched to enable our demographic rearmament.
Catherine Norris-Trent, your thoughts on demographic rearmament?
Well, it's what we just discussed, you know, countries getting richer, the birth rate dropping. So France's birth rate has dropped to its lowest levels since World War II. I think it's like 1.68 children per woman, and a decade ago it was nearly 2 children per woman, so there's been a sharp decline. But if you look across Europe, actually France has had one of the highest birth rates in European countries. This is continent-wide. It's, of course, this global trend we've been seeing in developed countries. So the French government has, you know, been pushing what they can do for some time now, of successive French governments, to try and, you know, keep the birth rate up. So you've got subsidised creches. They're going to extend parental leave, which would be very welcome, because it's actually quite short in France. And France became the first country as well to at least partially reimburse the women freezing their eggs for non-medical reasons as well. So this is clearly a long-term plan and something they're very concerned about. But I don't know whether all these subsidies are going to convince people to change their habits. A lot of people are, of course, worried about climate change and the high cost of living. It's just something that's, I think, is going to be quite difficult to reverse.
And what about that turn of phrase, demographic rearmament, that the president used?
Yeah, that was quite an aggressive one, wasn't it? And he's been slammed for some of his language during that very long press conference that he gave. Some quite strange language there. You know, Macron's likes grand turns of phrase, but that one, yeah, I mean, seeing population as a kind of weapon, or having a big population equals strength. I mean, wow, some pretty big plans he's got there.
Tanya Rachmanova.
A very short message, because I'm sure that that you can say a lot of things. I think that a normal woman hearing demographical rearmament would refuse to have children, because I don't want to arm any country. You know, once you decide to have a child, it's not to arm your country or any other countries. What a strange idea.
It is strange. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that we are a very cosseted, lazy generation of people. We just sit around consuming and watching TV. And having children, I have 2 lovely, beautiful children, the apple of my eye. But it's hard work having kids. That's the real issue here. How is he going to, you know, it's.
You didn't get the memo.
I didn't get the memo about that. So, you know, I'm not surprised. It's inevitable. We're too lazy for children. That's the problem.
I think that in France, I mean, my authorities of this generation, they're really very serious about this ecology, climate change, and they think, I mean, I had a lot of discussions on this, that we don't want to have a child that will have to solve all these problems. And this is kind of serious. I mean, first time I'm just...
How's demographic rearmament going, Nico Hines, where you are?
Well, we're ahead of you guys, if ahead means further down the downward slope, as most well-off countries in Europe are. And I think the one smart thing that was brought up that they might try and bring in is to try and make it easier to have kind of IVF and to do measures that can help people have children later in life, because it does seem to be a trend that women in particular, perhaps because they're want to do more with their careers and get ahead, and have other interests other than these kind of like terribly old-fashioned notions that Macron seems to have been parroting, that makes him sound like a sort of kind of Marshal Pétain of the modern era, talking about women should be having more children. But the reality now is that women have got a lot of other ideas, a lot of things that they want to do for themselves. But there are a lot who then a little bit later in life, at the age of 40 or so, are then thinking, oh, maybe I should have had children. So I think maybe the one way that we can get through this demographic challenge is if there's some huge advances in the science that allows people to prolong that period of their lives where they can have kids.
French politics junkies call her AOC. Amélie Oudéa-Castéra, the sports minister, who last week was also promoted to education minister when her predecessor, Gabriel Attal, became PM. There were doubting Thomases who wondered if she could handle both portfolios in a year where Paris hosts the Olympics. Then, within 48 hours of her nomination, she hit the political third rail when, on a visit with Attal to a public school northwest of the capital, Oudéa-Castéra was asked why she took her child out of a Paris Latin Quarter primary public school to put him in an exclusive Catholic school.
My husband and I saw loads of teaching hours without a serious replacement. And at one point we were fed up, like hundreds of thousands of families who made the decision to look for another solution.
Catherine Norris-Trent, how to make friends and influence people?
Right. You know what Alistair Campbell and other spin doctors say, when you've become the story, then you've become the problem. And she's really started her new job with a bang. And it looks like this is going to set to run and run, because the private Catholic school where she sent her children is now being investigated over allegations of sexism and homophobia as well. So that's not really a great look there. The other question I have in my mind is, hang on, French primary schools are great. Maybe there's a need to look at things further up the age range you go. But French primary education is really well. I think it's quite well structured. I mean, the teachers say they don't get paid enough, but it's a country where there's a high tax rate and a lot of investment in education, and it seems a very strange choice of education minister. Surely they would have checked that out. This question's bound to come up. I don't understand what they did there.
Penitence for the new education minister coming on Tuesday, when, to a chorus of boos, she went to the 6th arrondissement public school that she had disparaged to personally apologize for her inaccurate remarks to the teacher. Not enough, though, for the teachers' unions.
Teachers heard very clearly the rest of what she said, that she wanted to make sure that her children were safe and had access to higher knowledge. So what she's really saying is that state schools aren't in a position to do that.
Eric Randolph.
Okay, I'm going to take a slightly controversial view on this, which is that she clearly wanted the best education possible for her kids, which I think maybe is a good thing for an education minister. I mean, it would be weird if she didn't want the best education possible. And perhaps the school that she chose...
But she claimed there was absenteeism among the primary school teachers, which turned out to be false.
Yes, so the problem is that she dealt with it incredibly badly. But it's not her... I mean, if the school wasn't good enough and there was a better school nearby... The background to this is the private schools in France, Catholic private schools, actually aren't actually that expensive compared to other countries.
Because they're state subsidized.
Because they are still state subsidized. So there's a bigger problem here, which is that the state system is competing with quite an affordable private system in France, which splits your resources, and it makes it very easy for families who aren't that well off to choose a private school. It's not like in Britain where you have to be in the absolute elite to send your kids to a private school, and that splits the resources. So there's a problem with the system. So maybe she's the right person to do the job. Maybe she is the person to come in and she's got first-hand experience of that.
She's not the first one. Ségolène Royal, her children were in private school as well, in Boulogne. So the saying is that she said it and she lied. This is the saying.
Yes.
Right. And as Catherine Norris-Trent was saying, to add insult to injury, news breaking this week that the very school Amélie Oudéa-Castéra's children go to is now under investigation from her own ministry. For instance, for forcing its pupils to attend religious education classes, which is contrary to that law on state subsidies that Eric Randolph was talking about it. I know the British tabloids love a good scandal. Nico Hines, how would this one rate on your side of the channel?
Well, this is an absolute classic British tabloid scandal. And in fact, if you think about the thick of it, the classic British parody TV show about the disastrous politicians that we have, this exact plot line plays out when a new minister is appointed to the Department of Social Affairs, and then it turns out her children are about to go to a private school, and Malcolm Tucker, who's the sort of Alistair Campbell spin doctor figure, kind of comes in and shouts at her and says, suggests that she's making out that normal state schools are basically knife-addled rape sheds, and therefore that she has to send her kid there, otherwise it's giving the impression that these schools aren't good enough. And I think if you look at the story about the investigation that's going on at this school, I think that does raise a real issue here, because what you're getting is a different kind of education to ordinary people, and the fact that these like old-fashioned values are being perpetrated in these posh schools goes exactly to the point of why potentially a lot of people believe that everyone should have the same education. So I think, Eric, I kind of admire his dedication to defending, perhaps where he went to school. But ultimately, I think if you're going to be in charge of the state system, then you have to think it's good enough.
And it's big.
For the record, I went to state schools as well. I think the problem is specific to France. It's the fact that you're splitting those resources. It's not a narrow elite. The system clearly does need reforming. It's just unfortunate. It's the way she dealt with it that's the real problem here.
All right, at the big press conference on Tuesday, where Emmanuel Macron talked about demographic rearmament, he also talked a lot about education, with ideas like forcing kids to spend less time in front of screens, and an experimentation with school uniforms, a novelty, Catherine Norris-Trent, for French public education.
I know a lot of people in France seem to be in favour of this idea because they think it would promote, lessen, visible inequalities between, less well-off families and those whose parents couldn't afford to buy them designer clothes or trainers. But I went to school in the UK, in a state school, where we had a uniform, and, kids find a way of getting around any uniform. That's all I would say to France. Your shoes, your bag, your coat, your trainers when you do sports. So even if you've got the uniform, they can single out the differences between kids. It doesn't mean a completely level playing field, and just means the teachers spent all their time telling people to tuck their shirt in or put on a tie, basically, I think.
Tanya Rachmanova?
Well, I went to a normal Soviet school. We all had uniforms, and I think the positive thing is that in the morning you don't think about what to wear. You just put on your uniform and off you go. But I think that the French schools I don't think that only French, but in France we have we have serious problems in schools, and this big discussion about wearing uniform, not wearing in uniform. In in college they come to college,
Middle school.
They can't read and write. I have a friend, she's a history teacher, she says that she can't teach them because they can't read what she's giving them. That's a problem, and to have a uniform or not to have uniform, it reminds me of my Soviet childhood when we would discuss things completely irrelevant to forget about serious.
And missing the bigger problem.
Yeah.
Speaking of uniforms, only in France would official outfits for the Olympics be unveiled with a catwalk. They're made by Stéphane Ashpool, the creator of streetwear brand Pigalle. After Fashion Week, Eric Randolph, your quick thoughts on that?
Well, they've definitely got the strut down pretty well. I'd say I'd give them an 8.5 for their strutting ability. I've seen a lot of people work the catwalk now. I was impressed with that. So yeah, no, nice start.
It's not how well you do, it's how you look. We'll see. Eric Randolph, many thanks. I want to thank Tanya Rachmanova, Nico Hines in London, Catherine Norris-Trent reporting for us from Jerusalem. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.